They left a baby in a sack to die until a giant cowboy heard a tiny voice say, "Papa." The snow was falling heavy, the church bell tolling in the distance. When he stumbled on the bundle no one else dared touch. Inside, infant, gasping for life, whispering a word no baby should know. The town called it shame. The deputy called it sin. But the giant cowboy called it family. And when a widow with Comanche blood stepped from the shadows to help save the child, whispers turned to fury. Because some folks would rather see the baby vanish than admit the truth about who she belonged to. But every secret left in the dark has a way of burning its way into the light. Barns will blaze. Riders will come at midnight. And the biggest heart on the frontier will be tested like never before. The question is, when the whole town rises against him, can one lonely cowboy hold on to the only voice that ever called him Papa? Your reactions remind me why these stories matter. You still believe in the quiet power of love, justice, and truth. Then you're part of the reason I keep sharing them. The first rays of dawn had yet to breach the horizon as Jedediah Boone's heavy boots crunched through the fresh snow. His breath came out in white clouds as he made his way toward the small clapboard church of Granite Bluff. The town lay silent around him. Only thin wisps of smoke curling up from a few chimneys, too, marked the sleeping households. Jed pulled his coat tighter, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the pale lamplight from the church windows. He had promised Pastor Wilkins he would split wood before the morning service. And despite the bitter cold, a promise was a promise. The familiar weight of his axe swung at his side as he rounded the corner toward the woodpile. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he first mistook it for the winter wind whistling through the eaves. He stopped, head cocked. There it came again, weak, mewling cry that made his heart skip a beat. "Hello?" his deep voice carried in the stillness. The cry came again, definitely a baby's whimper. Drawing him toward the woodpile there, half buried in snow, lay a flour sack. Frost had formed cruel patterns across the rough fabric. Ged's hands, calloused from years of ranch work, trembled. As he knelt beside it, the crying grew softer, more desperate. "Dear Lord," he whispered, carefully pulling back the frozen cloth. Inside, a tiny baby girl lay fighting for each breath, her skin taking on a bluish tinge. Without hesitation, Jed scooped her up, cradling her against his chest. He shrugged out of his heavy coat, wrapping it around her small form. That's when he heard it, so faint he wasn't sure if it was real or his mind playing tricks. A whispered word, "Papa." Yet's heart thundered in his chest. He stared down at the infant, but her eyes were squeezed shut against the cold. Had he imagined it? It didn't matter. Now this child needed help fast. "Hold on, little one," he murmured, gathering her closer. His long strides ate up the distance to the church door. He burst through it with enough force to make the hinges. Grown Pastor Wilkins looked up from his morning prayers, startled by the interruption. The lamplight caught his concerned expression as he rose from the front pew. "Jedediah, what found her by the woodpile?" Jed said, his voice rough with emotion. "Near frozen solid." The door opened again as several townspeople, drawn by the commotion, filed in. Mrs. Henderson from the general store gasped. Tom Bradley, on his way to open the livery stable, craned his neck to see. "Whose child is it?" Someone whispered. "Left to die, poor thing," another voice added. The pastor hurried forward, his usual gentle manner replaced by urgent authority. "We need to warm her immediately. Mrs. Henderson, fetch blankets from the church chest. Tom, stoke up the stove as hot as it'll go." People scrambled to help, but Jed noticed the sideways glances, the worried murmurs. Already, he could feel the scandal brewing like an approaching storm. In a town as small as Granite Bluff, secrets didn't keep long, and questions would soon follow about where this child came from and what was to be done with her. "Give her here," Mrs. Henderson said, arms outstretched. A baby needs a woman's touch. But Jed stood his ground, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, somehow seeming even taller. The tiny bundle in his arms had stirred something deep inside him. Something he'd thought died along with his Sarah 3 years ago. "No," he said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "I won't let her perish. I found her, and I aim to see her through." Pastor Wilkins studied him thoughtfully, then nodded. The Lord works in mysterious ways, friends. Perhaps he had a purpose in guiding Jedediah to that woodpile this morning. More townsfolk were arriving now, word spreading quickly through Granite Bluff's streets. The whispers grew louder, theories and judgments mixing with genuine concern for the baby's welfare. But who would do such a thing? Mrs. Henderson fretted, arranging warm blankets near the stove, leaving a helpless infant out in the cold. Probably some young girl in trouble, Tom Bradley said darkly. Or maybe Indians. "That's enough speculation," Pastor Wilkins cut in sharply. "Right now, this child needs our help, not our assumptions." Jed barely heard them. He was focused entirely on the small life in his arms, watching color slowly return to her tiny cheeks as the church grew warmer. Her features were delicate, perfect like a china doll his Sarah had once kept on their mantel. That whispered word echoed in his memory. Papa. Real or imagined, it had awakened something in him. His massive hands, which could break a wild horse or fell a tree, now cradled this fragile creature with infinite tenderness. He remembered how Sarah had always said he'd make a fine father someday. They'd tried, but God had other plans. Now, standing in the lamplit church with snow melting from his boots, Jed felt the first stirring of purpose he'd known since burying his wife. The pastor's hand came to rest on his shoulder. "What do you reckon to do, Jedediah?" Jed looked up, meeting the curious and concerned faces of his neighbors. He knew what they saw: a rough giant of a man, more suited to breaking broncos than tending babies. But he also knew what he had to do. "She needs someone to care for her," he said simply. "I aim to do that." The murmurs rose again, but Jed stood firm, remembering that whispered word that had pierced his lonely heart. Whatever came next, whatever struggles or scandal lay ahead, he knew God had led him to that woodpile for a reason. This little one needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed her to dot the warmth. From the pot-bellied stove filled the church's main room as townspeople crowded around, their voices rising and falling like waves. Jed sat on the front pew, his large frame hunched protectively over the tiny bundle in his arms. Mrs. Henderson had found a clean handkerchief, which he dipped in sugar water, letting drops fall onto the baby's tongue. "There now, little one," he murmured, his weathered face soft with concern. "That's right, take what you need." Near the back of the church, Widow Mathers's sharp voice cut through the general murmur. "Mark my words, that child is born of sin. No God-fearing mother abandons her baby in the snow. It's cursed, plain as day." The baby's fingers, pink now with returning warmth, curled around Jed's thick thumb. He paid the widow's words no mind, focused entirely on counting each tiny swallow. Pastor Wilkins stood at the pulpit, his kind face grave but hopeful. "Friends, we're witnessing a miracle this morning. That this child survived the night's bitter cold, that Jedediah found her before it was too late. Surely these are signs of God's infinite mercy." Mercy? Deputy Harlan Pike snorted from his position by the door. "More likely we'll be paying for her upkeep out of town funds. She'll need proper care, not just prayers." The baby stirred, making a soft mewling sound. That whispered word, Papa, echoed again in Jed's memory. Whether divine intervention or desperate imagination, it had awakened something fierce and protective in his heart. He stood suddenly, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "If no one else will, I'll raise her myself." The declaration landed like a stone in still water. Silence spread outward, followed by ripples of reaction. Mrs. Henderson pressed a hand to her chest. Tom Bradley's mouth fell open. Several women exchanged worried glances. "You?" Martha Cooper tittered nervously. "Why, Mr. Boone, you're as big as a grizzly bear. Those hands of yours could crush a delicate thing like that without meaning to." Other women nodded, whispering behind their hands. "He can't even cook proper meals for himself," someone murmured. "Lives like a hermit out there on his ranch." Deputy Pike pushed away from the wall, his badge catching the lamplight as he stepped forward. "Now see here, Boone, you can't just claim a baby like she's a stray calf. There are proper channels, authorities to notify." His thin lips curved. In a mocking smile, "Besides, what does a man like you know about raising an infant?" Jed turned slowly to face the deputy, drawing himself up to his full height. The baby remained serene in his arms, as if she knew she was safe there. "I know about love," he said quietly. "I know about responsibility, and I know this little one was placed in my path for a reason. Placed there, or planted there." Pike's eyes narrowed. "Mighty convenient. You finding her like that makes a body wonder if you know more than you're telling." Before Jed could respond, movement near the door drew everyone's attention. Sophia Lone Feather stepped into the lamplight, her dark hair neat beneath a worn shawl. She moved with quiet dignity, despite the way some townspeople drew back from her approach. "The child needs motherwort tea," she said softly, her voice clear and steady. "It will ease her belly and help her sleep. I have some dried and knowledge of other herbs that might help her thrive." Deputy Pike's hand dropped to his gun belt, though he didn't draw. Well, the Indian widow shows up mighty quick. Maybe we found our mystery mother, folks. Sophia's dark eyes flashed, but her composure never wavered. "I was not this child's mother, Deputy Pike, but I know how to care for infants who come too soon or grow weak. My grandmother taught me our people's ways, and I've helped birth many babies in this town, including your own nephew last spring." The deputy flushed red, but Pastor Wilkins stepped between them. "Sister Sophia's knowledge has been a blessing to this community many times. If she offers help, we should thank the Lord for it." "Thank the Lord," Widow Mather scoffed. "For heathen medicine, for Christian charity," the pastor corrected firmly. "Seems in short supply this morning." Jed watched Sophia carefully. He'd seen her at church sometimes, sitting quietly in the back pew. Town gossip said she'd been widowed 3 years ago, same as him, though her husband had died in a ranch accident rather than fever. She'd lost a baby too, he'd heard, though such things weren't spoken of directly. "I'd be grateful for any help you can give," he said, his deep voice gentle. "She's so small, and I've got much to learn." Sophia moved closer, her steps unhurried, despite the suspicious stares following her. She looked down at the baby, and something in her expression softened. "May I?" Jed nodded, and she reached out one finger to touch the baby's cheek. The infant turned toward the touch, making a small sound of contentment. "She's stronger than she looks," Sophia said, "but she'll need careful tending these first days. Show you how to prepare the herbs, how to hold her for feeding, how to read her needs." "Now, just a minute," Deputy Pike started, but Pastor Wilkins raised his hand. "It seems to me," the pastor said, "that the Lord has provided exactly what this child needs: a strong protector with a loving heart, and a wise healer with knowledge of infant care. Who are we to question his arrangements?" The baby chose that moment to let out a clear, healthy cry. Jed rocked her gently, and to everyone's surprise, she settled immediately, turning her face into his chest. "Well, I never," Mrs. Henderson breathed. "She knows who saved her, right enough." Sophia reached into her shawl and drew out a small packet of dried herbs. "This will help for now. I can bring more from my garden, show you how to prepare it properly." "Much obliged," Jed said simply. But his eyes conveyed deeper gratitude. The morning light was streaming through the church windows now, painting the scene in soft gold. The baby slept peacefully in Yet's arms, her color healthy, her breathing steady. Whatever storms of gossip and prejudice might come, this moment held its own kind of grace, a rough-handed rancher, a gentle healer, and a tiny soul who had brought them together in defiance of the town's expectations. The winter sun hung low on the horizon as Jed carried the precious bundle toward his cabin. His boots crunched through fresh snow, leaving deep prints in the gathering dusk. The baby, wrapped snug in blankets donated by Mrs. Henderson, barely stirred against his chest. His home appeared ahead through the trees, a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling from the stone chimney. He'd left the fire banked that morning. Thank Providence. The sight of it struck him differently now. Its lonely silhouette, a stark reminder of all he lacked for caring for an infant. Inside, the familiar sense of wood smoke and saddle leather greeted him. An empty rocking chair sat beside the hearth, untouched since Sarah passed 3 years ago. Dust had settled on the mantel where her Bible still lay. The cabin felt suddenly strange to him, too rough, too male, too bereft of the gentle touches a baby would need. "Now then," he murmured to the child, "let's get you settled." But as he stood in the middle of his sparse home, uncertainty gripped him. The baby would need milk, proper wrappings, a warm place to sleep. He had nothing but calloused hands and good intentions. He was still standing there, swaying gently with the bundle, when a soft knock sounded at the door. Sophia Lone Feather stepped inside, carrying a covered basket. Her dark eyes took in the cabin's interior without judgment. "I thought you might need some help getting started," she said, setting her basket on the table. Steam rose when she lifted the cloth cover, releasing the scent of herbs and warm milk. "Much obliged," Jed said gruffly, relief evident in his voice. "I reckon I'm a mite lost here." Sophia moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking her supplies. "First, we'll need more warmth. The stones by your hearth may I use them." At his nod, she wrapped several smooth river rocks in cloth and nestled them near the fire. While they heated, she laid out her other provisions: a glass bottle with a rubber nipple, strips of soft cloth, a jar of goat's milk, and several packets of dried herbs. "The stones will warm the cradle," she explained, gesturing to the crude wooden box Jed had hastily constructed that afternoon. Babies need constant heat, like a mother's body would provide. The baby whimpered, and Jed's large hands trembled slightly as he tried to adjust her wrappings. Sophia stepped closer, her movements careful and deliberate. "Here," she said softly, "let me show you." She demonstrated how to hold the infant while unwrapping her, supporting the tiny head. "See how her neck needs special care? She's so new, her muscles aren't strong yet." Jed watched intently as Sophia prepared a mixture of goat's milk and herbs. In the bottle, his brow furrowed with concentration as she showed him how to test the temperature on his wrist. "Not too hot," she cautioned, "just warm enough. Like this." She handed him the bottle, guiding his hands into position. Let her take it slowly, just a few drops at a time. The baby accepted the milk weakly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Yet's heart swelled as he watched her tiny throat working, her eyes half closed in contentment. "There now," he whispered. "That's a good girl." Sophia moved the heated stones to the cradle, lining them carefully with cloth. The wooden box, rough-hewn but solid, would serve well enough for now. She laid a clean blanket inside, creating a nest of warmth. Outside, the winter wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Inside, the fire crackled steadily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For the first time since finding the child, Jed felt the full weight of what he'd undertaken settle on his shoulders. As if reading his thoughts, Sophia spoke quietly. "You're doing well with her. She knows she's safe." Before Jed could respond, another knock broke the peaceful moment. Deputy Pike's voice carried through the door. "Everything proper in there, Boone?" Folks in town are mighty curious about this situation. Jed's jaw tightened as he opened the door. The deputy stood on the porch, thumb hooked in his gun belt, peering past him to where Sophia worked. "Well, well," Pike drawled. "Quite the cozy scene." Word spreading at the mercantile about this peculiar arrangement. Some folks wondering if there might be more to the story than meets the eye. "Ain't nothing peculiar about Christian charity," Jed replied evenly. "Miss Lonefeather's helping me care for an innocent child. That's all there is to it." Pike's eyes narrowed. "That's so?" "Because some are saying this might be her baby convenient story about finding it in the snow. Others wonder if maybe certain ranchers are hiding something. Mighty strange timing, wouldn't you say?" Before Jed could answer, the baby began to cry. Sophia's voice came from behind him, calm and clear. "Deputy Pike, if you've no official business here, that child needs rest and quiet. Whatever gossip you've heard, the truth is simple. She needs care, and we're providing it." The deputy's hand tightened on his belt, but he stepped back. "Just doing my duty, keeping an eye on things. Good evening to you both." His boots scraped on the porch as he turned away, but his words hung in the air like frost. After he left, Jed closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly tired. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, but the peace of earlier was broken. He could almost feel the weight of the town's suspicion pressing in through the walls without thinking about it. He sank to his knees beside the hearth. His lips moved silently for a moment before words came. "Lord, I ain't much for proper prayers, but this little one needs help. Give me strength to do right by her, whatever comes." As if in answer, Sophia's voice lifted in song a gentle melody, unlike any he'd heard before. The words were strange to him, but the tune itself spoke of comfort and sleep. The baby settled immediately, her tiny fingers uncurling as she drifted off. "A cradle song," Sophia explained softly when she finished. "My grandmother sang it to me, and her grandmother before her. It speaks of safety, of being watched over by loving eyes." Jed looked around his cabinette, the rough furniture softened by firelight. At the cradle now holding precious life. At this gentlewoman, whose presence had transformed his barren home into something altogether different. For the first time since Sarah's passing, the rooms felt lived in, warmed by more than just the hearth's fire. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than their size. Sophia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'll come back tomorrow, show you more about the herbs and feeding. She need watching through the night." "I'll watch," Jed promised. "Ain't sleeping much anyway these days." As Sophia gathered her shawl to leave, the baby sighed in her sleep, a sound of pure contentment. Despite the deputy's suspicions, despite the town's whispers, despite all the uncertainty ahead, Jed felt an unfamiliar peace settle over his home. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, for now, in this moment, all was right in his world. Dawn brought a gentle snowfall and Sophia's return. She arrived as the sun barely touched the frosted window panes, her shawl dusted white, a leather pouch clutched close. Inside the cabin, Jed sat in his chair by the cradle, dark circles under his eyes telling of his sleepless night. "You need rest," Sophia said softly, unwrapping her bundle. The sharp, clean scent of willow bark filled the air. The baby's fever rose just before sunrise. Jed's voice was rough with exhaustion. His massive hands, more suited to felling trees than tending infants, adjusted the blanket with surprising gentleness. Been trying to keep her cool like you showed me. Sophia nodded, already preparing the willow bark tea. She worked methodically, crushing the bark and steeping it in water warmed just enough. This will help bring the fever down. We'll give it to her a few drops at a time. Jed watched intently as she demonstrated, his tired eyes focused on every movement. The baby accepted the medicine without fuss, and his tense shoulders relaxed slightly. "You make it look so natural," he admitted. "Practice," Sophia replied, a small smile touching her lips. "And patience, both will come to you." A sharp knock at the door interrupted the peaceful moment. Deputy Harlan Pike stood on the porch, his badge catching the weak morning light. His lip curled as he saw Sophia through the doorway. "Well now, ain't this cozy?" He pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Got something here might interest you, Boone." He tossed the letter onto Yet's table, making no effort to hide his satisfaction. "Seems some folks take exception to your playing house with this situation." Jed unfolded the letter, his expression darkening as he read. The paper bore the McAllister Ranch letterhead, the words precise and threatening. The foreman's signature was bold at the bottom, but the message clearly came from higher up. "Says here the child belongs to young McAllister," Jed said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. "Says we're to keep quiet about finding her, or there'll be consequences." Sophia moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Her face remained calm, but her fingers tightened on the back of his chair. "They admit their guilt, then threaten those who would help an innocent child." "That's right," Deputy Pike smirked. "Powerful folks. The McAllisters own half the water rights in the county. Shame if something happened to your grazing permits. A boon?" Jed stood slowly, his full height making the deputy step back despite himself. "That all you came to say?" "Just delivering the message." Pike adjusted his gun belt. "Being helpful, you might say. Wouldn't want any accidents." After the deputy left, Jed remained standing, the letter crumpled in his fist. Sophia touched his arm gently. "We must be careful now," she said. "They have influence, and they're afraid of scandal. They're afraid of truth," Jed growled. "Left. Their own blood to die in the snow, and now they think money can bury their shame." Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. The little church filled quickly, steam rising from stamped boots and Sunday coats. Jed sat in his usual back pew, the baby bundled against his chest. Sophia sat nearby, ignoring the sideways glances and mass. Whispers. Pastor Wilkins stood tall in his pulpit, his Bible open before him. His voice carried clearly as he read, "Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction." Half the congregation shifted uncomfortably. Several of the prominent ranchers' wives exchanged meaningful looks. Near the front, Deputy Pike made a show of cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. The pastor continued, undaunted, "And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." His eyes met Yet's briefly, approval clear in his gaze. After the service, people filed out quickly, few meeting Yet's eyes. But several ranch hands lingered, their faces troubled. One approached as Jed adjusted the baby's blanket against the cold. "Boone," the man said quietly, glancing around. "You're a good man, but listen, don't cross the McAllisters. They don't forget, and they don't forgive. That water they control. It's life out here. They can dry up a man's land without leaving a mark anyone can prove." Jed nodded once, acknowledging the warning without accepting its implications. He carried the baby home through the crisp afternoon, her weight warm against his chest, her breath soft against his neck. Each step strengthened his resolve. Night settled early, as it did in winter. Jed sat in his chair, watching shadows dance. On the walls, as the lamp burned low, a letter lay open on the table. its threats stark in the failing light. Outside, a coyote called lonely and wild. Sophia sat near the cradle, her fingers moving steadily as she mixed herbs for the baby's morning feeding. Her presence filled the cabin with a quiet strength that seemed to push back against the darkness gathering outside. "You're thinking about their threats," she said, without looking up. "Thinking about choices," Jed replied, "about what's right and what's easy." "She chose you," Sophia said simply. "That first morning in the snow." Her life itself is proof of their guilt. Yes, but also proof of God's providence that's stronger than their threats. The baby stirred in her cradle, making small sounds of contentment. Jed watched her tiny fingers curl and uncurl in sleep, marveling at how something so small could stand at the center of such a storm. "They'll come again," he said finally, "with more than just letters." "Yes," Sophia agreed. "But they'll find more than just you standing in their way." The morning after Pastor Wilkins' sermon, Jed stared at the squirming bundle on his kitchen table. A fresh diaper cloth spread before him like a puzzle. His large fingers, calloused from years of ranch work, fumbled with the tiny safety pins. "Now how in tarnation," he muttered, the baby kicking freely while he tried to remember Sophia's instructions from yesterday. A soft laugh came from the doorway. Sophia stood there, her shawl dusted with fresh snow, eyes twinkling with amusement. "Here," she said, stepping forward. "Let me show you again." Her hands moved with practiced grace, demonstrating the proper way to fold and secure the cloth. "See, not so different from wrapping a wound or bundling a lamb. Gentle, but firm." Jed watched intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When it was his turn to try, his huge hands trembled slightly as he lifted the baby. "Feel like I might break her," he admitted quietly. "Babies are stronger than they look," Sophia assured him. She reached into her basket and pulled out a long strip of woven cloth dyed in warm earth tones. "This is how my people carry their little ones. It keeps them close to the heart." She showed him how to wrap the cloth across his broad chest, creating a secure pocket for the baby. When he finally got her settled, the infant's weight rested against him like a warm blessing. Her tiny fingers curled around his thumb, and Jed felt something shift inside his chest. "Well, I'll be," he whispered, watching those perfect little fingers. "Look at that grip." Sophia smiled, adjusting the wrap slightly. "She knows she's safe with you." The heartbeat reminds them of the womb. That's why they sleep so well when carried this way. Later that morning, they made their way to the mercantile. Jed had never felt more self-conscious walking down Main Street, the baby secured to his chest in the Indian-style wrap. He could feel the stairs as he pushed open the store door, bell jingling overhead. Mrs. Peterson, the mercantile owner's wife, nearly dropped her ledger book at the sight of him. Jed cleared his throat. "Need some more of them diaper cloths," he said gruffly, "and maybe something soft for swaddling." Behind him, he heard snickers from a group of cowboys lounging near the pickle barrel. One whispered something about playing nursemaid, drawing muffled laughter. Yet's shoulders stiffened. But he kept his focus on the task at hand. Mrs. Peterson recovered her composure and led him to a shelf of fabrics. "The flannel here is good for babies," she offered, her initial surprise giving way to a gentler expression. "My Sarah used it for all three of hers." As Jed examined the cloth with uncertain fingers, more customers drifted in. Some openly stared at the sight of the towering rancher with an infant strapped to his chest, but others, particularly the mothers, began to nod approvingly. Old Widow Jenkins even stepped forward to coo at the baby, her weathered face softening. Outside the store, Sophia waited in the shelter of the awning. Snow was falling again, thick flakes catching in her dark hair. As they walked back toward his cabin, she shared more of her people's wisdom. "See how the snow falls in rhythm?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly in the winter stillness. like a horse's hooves on soft ground. Our songs for babies follow that same pattern. It soothes them. She demonstrated, humming a gentle melody that rose and fell like wind through prairie grass. The baby stirred against Jed's chest, making soft sounds of contentment. He found himself swaying slightly with the rhythm, earning another smile from Sophia. For colic, she continued, gesturing. To the herbs in her basket, we use fennel and mint. But the most important medicine is keeping them warm and close. She glanced at his cabin up ahead. The fire must stay strong through the night. We say a child's spirit dances in the flames while they sleep. Jed absorbed every word, struck by how much he had to learn. He'd spent his life mastering the hard skills of ranching, breaking horses, mending fences, surviving storms. But this new challenge required a gentleness he wasn't sure he possessed. That evening, as darkness settled early and heavy snow blanketed the town, Jed sat in his rocking chair near the hearth. The baby was freshly changed and fed, drowsing against his chest. He'd managed the diaper himself this time, though it wasn't nearly as neat as Sophia's work. Sophia knelt by the fire, adding another log. The flames caught quickly, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Then, to Yeth's surprise, she remained kneeling, her hands folded in prayer, watching her. Jed felt the weight of memory press against his heart. How long had it been since he'd really prayed? Since Sarah died, he'd mostly offered quick, guilty nods toward heaven. But now, rocking slowly with this miracle child in his arms, he felt something crack open inside him. The baby sighed in her sleep, her small warmths seeping through his shirt. Her trust in him was complete, unearned. Just like grace, he thought suddenly, just like love. Lord, he heard Sophia whisper, watch over this little one. Guide our hands as we care for her. And thank you for bringing new life to lonely hearts. Jed closed his eyes, adding his own silent amen. Since losing Sarah, he'd walled himself off from hope, from the possibility of family. But here, in this quiet moment, with snow falling outside and a baby breathing peacefully against his heart, he felt those walls beginning to crumble. Perhaps God hadn't finished with him after all. Perhaps this child, abandoned in the snow, was more than just a responsibility. She was a second chance, wrapped in swaddling clothes and trust. The first. Warm breeze of spring danced through Granite Bluff, melting patches of snow and stirring new life in the meadow grass. Pastor Wilkins had chosen a perfect afternoon for the church picnic. With sunshine warming the earth and wildflowers dotting the hillside in tiny bursts of purple and gold, Jed guided his wagon slowly along the rutted path, one hand steady on the reins while Sophia sat beside him, cradling the baby. The infant had grown stronger over the winter weeks, her cheeks now rosy and full, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. She wore a fresh cotton dress that Widow Jenkins had sewn, complete, with tiny embroidered flowers at the collar. Reckon we're causing quite a stir, Jed murmured as they approached the gathering. Sure enough, heads turned to watch their arrival. The sight of the giant rancher, the half-Comanche widow, and the mysterious baby made an unusual family portrait. Sophia adjusted the baby's bonnet, her voice calm but carrying a hint of tension. Let them look. We have nothing to hide. They pulled up beside the other wagons, and Jed helped Sophia down with gentle courtesy. The baby chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, reaching toward Jed with tiny, grasping hands. He lifted her, carefully, still marveling at how natural it felt now to hold her. Land sakes, just look how she's grown, Mrs. Peterson called out, approaching with a basket of fresh-baked rolls. Her previous skepticism had mellowed over the weeks, especially after watching Jed faithfully buying baby supplies at her store. She's thriving, plain as day. Other church ladies gathered around, their expressions softening at the sight of the baby's bright smile. Even Widow Mathers, who had been among the harshest critics, stepped closer to peer at the child. "She does have the sweetest laugh," Widow Mathers admitted, as the baby reached for her spectacles with determined fingers. Pastor Wilkins spread blankets on the new grass, and soon the meadow filled with the sounds of children playing and women setting out covered dishes. The smell of fried chicken and fresh bread mingled with the spring air. Sophia laid out her contribution, cornbread made with wild honey and herbs, while Jed kept the baby entertained. Time for the three-legged race. The pastor called out, and children scrambled to pair up. Young Tommy Jenkins tugged at Jed's sleeve. "Mr. Boone, sir, would you hold the baby so Ma can race with Pa?" Jed settled on a blanket, the infant secure in his arms, and watched the chaos unfold. Couples stumbled and laughed, tied together at the ankle. The baby squealed with delight at each tumble, her joy infectious. As the afternoon wore on, someone brought out a fiddle. Hymns rose sweet and clear in the spring air, with the baby adding her own musical coos. Sophia sat nearby, her dark hair catching glints of sunlight as she clapped in time with the music. Watching her, Jed felt something warm and unexpected bloom in his chest. She had become as essential to his days as breathing. Her quiet wisdom, her gentle strength, the way she moved through his home as if she belonged there. "You know," he said suddenly, loud enough for nearby picnickers to hear, "maybe I ought to just marry Sophia proper. Give this little one a real home." He tried to make it sound like a joke, but his voice carried more truth than he'd intended. Several people chuckled warmly. Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly, while her husband elbowed his friends with a knowing grin. But others exchanged scandalized whispers behind raised hands. A white rancher marrying a half-Comanche woman was still shocking to some. Even in a frontier town, Sophia's cheeks flushed dark rose, but when she glanced at Jed, her eyes held a glimmer of something that made his heart skip. Hope, maybe, or possibility. The baby reached for her, and Sophia gathered her close, humming a melody that mixed hymn and tribal song. The child's laughter rang pure and clear across the meadow, drawing smiles from even the most hardened faces. For one golden afternoon, Jed felt the pieces of his world sliding into place. The weight of the past winter's struggles seemed lighter. He watched Sophia dancing with the baby in her arms, saw the way other mothers included her in their conversations, noticed how the children had stopped whispering about her, Karatush, and simply begged her to tell stories. This was what belonging felt like, he realized. This was family. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the meadow, they packed up their wagon for the ride home. The baby was drowsy now, content in her blankets. Jed helped Sophia up onto the seat, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary on hers. That's when he saw them, two riders on the ridge, their horses stamped with McAllister brands. They sat motionless, watching the dispersing picnic crowd. Even at this distance, their presence felt like a shadow falling across the warm spring day. Sophia followed his gaze and drew the baby closer. "They cannot touch what God has blessed," she said softly. But Jed noticed how she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. He clucked to the horses, turning the wagon toward home. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in sheets of gold and rose. Behind them, the last notes of hymns faded into evening birdsong. The baby stirred and cooed, her small sounds a reminder of everything they had to protect. Yet, even as unease crept back into his thoughts, Jed couldn't forget the pure joy of her laughter ringing across the meadow. That sound echoed in his heart. As they rode home through the gathering dusk, a promise of happiness worth fighting for. The crackle of flames jolted Jed from his sleep. Smoke curled under his bedroom door, bitter and thick. For a moment, his mind spun in confusion. Then he heard it, the terrified screams of horses from his barn, their hooves thundering against wooden stalls. He bolted upright, lungs already burning. The baby, his bare feet hit the cold floorboards as he charged down the hall to her cradle. Through the window, an orange glow lit the night like false dawn. The barn was burning. The baby stirred in her sleep, peaceful and unaware. Jed scooped her up, blanket and all, cradling her against his chest. "Sophia!" he bellowed. "Fire!" Sophia burst from the spare room, her long black braids swinging. "The horses, get out now," Jed commanded, pushing her toward the door. The baby woke with a startled cry as they stumbled onto the porch. Heat slapped their faces. The barn was a tower of flame, sending sparks swirling into the starless sky. That's when Jed saw them, dark shapes on horseback, circling in the firelight like demons. 5 riders, their faces hidden behind bandanas. The horses' flanks gleamed with sweat, reflecting the inferno. "Give her up." The lead rider's voice was muffled but filled with menace. "Hand over the child or burn with her." Yet's heart hammered. These were Mike Callister's men had to be. Come to silence the scandal once and for all. The baby wailed, and Jed turned his broad back to the riders, shielding her tiny body. "Get inside," he shouted to Sophia. But she was already racing toward the barn where his horses still screamed in terror. "No." Jed lunged for her, but she was too quick. A burning beam crashed down at the barn entrance, sending up a fountain of sparks. Sophia darted sideways, but not fast enough. The timber caught her arm, spinning her to the ground. A cry of pain cut through the roar of flames. The riders spurred closer, hooves churning the dirt. One raised a rifle. Jed dove for the porch, where his shotgun leaned against the wall. With the baby tucked in one massive arm, he swung the weapon up and fired both barrels into the air. The blast echoed off the hills like thunder. The horses reared, dancers in the firelight. Their riders fought for control as Jed worked the action. "Ready to fire again? Clear off," he roared. "Or the next shot won't be aimed high." For a heartbeat, the masked men hesitated. Then the leader wheeled his mount. "This ain't over, Boone." They galloped into the darkness, leaving only the sound of flames and Sophia's ragged breathing. Jed raced to where she lay. Her face was streaked with soot, and angry red burns marked her right arm from shoulder to elbow. "Can you walk?" She nodded, struggling to her feet. Together, they stumbled back from the heat as the barn's roof gave way with a mighty crash. Sparks exploded upward like a swarm of fireflies. The baby coughed, burying her face against Jed's neck. All through the endless night, they watched the barn burn. Sophia sat wrapped in wet blankets, fighting waves of pain while Jed tended her burns with cool well water. The baby whimpered, her tiny lungs irritated by smoke. Dawn came gray and cheerless. Where the barn had stood was nothing but smoking ruins. The acrid stench of burnt wood and hay hung in the air. Worse was the silence, no nickering of horses, no rustle of life. Everything gone. Jed knelt in the ashes, letting them sift through his fingers. His livelihood lay in ruins. 4 good horses dead, feed and tack destroyed. But that wasn't what brought him to his knees. He looked at Sophia, her arm carefully bandaged, dark eyes glazed with exhaustion and pain. She had nearly died trying to save his horses. The baby dozed fitfully in her lap, still coughing now and then. These 2 precious lives threatened because of his stubborn pride. The townsfolk's warnings echoed in his mind. A rough bachelor had no business raising a child. He was putting her in danger, putting them both in danger. The McAllisters wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, for the first time since finding that tiny bundle in the snow. Doubt crushed Jed's resolve. He stared at his huge, calloused hands made for breaking horses and hefting timber. How could he have thought they could cradle something so fragile? How could he protect a baby when he couldn't even keep his barn from burning? Sophia's soft voice broke through his dark thoughts. Jed. He couldn't meet her eyes. Kedadiah Boone. Look at me. He raised his head. Despite her pain, her gaze was steady and fierce. The baby stirred in her arms, reaching one small hand toward him. But the weight of failure pressed down like a mountain. His shoulders slumped as he watched thin wisps of smoke rise from the ashes of everything he'd built. The morning sun cast long shadows across the burned ground, marking the end of his dream of making a home for this child. He had been a fool to think he could stand against the McAllisters, a fool to risk Sophia's life, a fool to believe he could be more than what he was, a lonely rancher with nothing now but charred timbers and broken hopes. The baby coughed again, the sound tearing at his heart. Sophia held her closer, humming a soft Comanche melody despite her obvious pain. They were hurt, homeless, hunted all, because he had dared to imagine they could be a family in the cold light of dawn. Jed faced the bitter truth. He had failed. Them both mourning brought a strange parade to Yet's homestead. Neighbors trickled in, drawn by the smoke that still rose from the barn's remains. Some came with food and blankets, others just to gawk and whisper. Martha Jenkins brought fresh milk and cornbread, while old Tom Fletcher offered lumber from his mill. But for every helping hand, there were 3 sets of judging eyes. Bringing trouble down on all our heads, Widow Mathers muttered, loud enough to carry. She stood with a cluster of women, their heads bent together like crows. Mark my words, the McAllisters won't stop here. Inside the cabin, Pastor Wilkins knelt beside Sophia's bed, his weathered Bible open on his knee. Her arm lay heavily bandaged, face drawn with pain, but composed. The morning light through the window caught the sheen of sweat on her brow. Lord, the pastor prayed, his gentle voice steady, bring healing to your daughter's wounds, strength to her spirit, and peace to this home. His hand rested lightly on her forehead. Grant wisdom to those who must choose between what is easy and what is right. The baby fussed in her cradle, still wheezing slightly from the smoke. Jed lifted her carefully, his massive hands somehow gentle around her tiny form. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hadn't slept since the fire. Couldn't sleep, not with the image of those masked riders burned into his mind. He settled into his chair by the stove, measuring sugar water into a spoon. The baby took it eagerly, but her usual happy gurgle was missing. The smoke had left her irritable and uncomfortable. Each tiny cough twisted something in Jed's chest. She needs more goat's milk, Sophia said weakly from her bed. The sugar water won't be enough. Before Jed could answer, boot heels clicked on the porch. Deputy Harlan Pike pushed through the door without knocking, his badge catching the lamplight. His thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Quite a mess you've made, Boone. The deputy's eyes swept the room, lingering on Sophia's bandaged arm. Though I reckon you brought it on yourself. Jet's hands tightened around the baby. She squirmed, sensing his tension. The McAllisters are respected folk, Pike continued, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. They can provide for the child proper-like. Give her advantages you never could. His smile widened. Might be best to hand her over quiet before more accidents happen. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Yet's muscles coiled, rage building. In his chest, one hand could crush Pike's scrawny neck. But the baby stirred against him, and Sophia's soft intake of breath steadied him. Violence would only prove their enemies right. Much obliged for your concern, Deputy, Jed said carefully. But I reckon you've said your piece. Pike's face darkened. Don't be a fool, Boone. You're just a broken-down cowboy. What right you've got to the Lord's right? Pastor Wilkins interrupted, rising from Sophia's bedside. The right of mercy and justice. Now I suggest you leave this house of healing, Deputy, unless you've come to help rebuild. Pike's hand twitched toward his gun, but the pastor's calm gaze didn't waver. With a final sneer, the deputy turned and stalked out. The day crawled past. Neighbors drifted away as evening approached, leaving behind their mix of charity and judgment. Jed moved through the hours like a man underwater, feeding the baby, checking Sophia's fever, thanking those who helped. But doubt gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. As night fell, he sat in his chair, rocking slowly. The baby was restless, fighting. Sleep, her tiny hand reached up, catching in his beard. The gentle tug brought unexpected tears to his eyes. How could something so small hold his heart so completely? "I can hear you thinking from here," Sophia whispered from her bed. The lamplight cast soft shadows across her face. "You're wondering if they're right." Jed didn't answer right away. The fire popped and crackled, throwing wild shadows on the walls. "They nearly killed you," he said finally. "Burned everything I built. Next time," he couldn't finish. "Next time. We'll be ready." Sophia's voice was weak, but determined. "Don't surrender her, Jed. She's not their property to claim. She's God's gift to you, to us all." The baby's fingers relaxed their grip as she finally drifted to sleep. Jed studied her peaceful face, remembering that first whispered "Papa" in the snow. Had it been real? Did it matter? "I won't let them hurt either of you again," he said softly. Sophia tried to sit up, wincing. "What are you planning?" "Rest easy," he told her. "I aim to end this proper." Through the long night, Jed sat vigil. The fire burned low, casting flickering light across the cabin's rough walls. Every creak and whisper of wind brought his head up, watching for shadows. But his mind was working, weighing options, counting costs. When the first gray light of dawn touched the window, he had made his choice. He rose carefully, laying the baby in her cradle. With quiet efficiency, he pulled on his heavy coat and gun belt. "Jed." Sophia's voice was clouded with sleep and pain. "Where are you going?" He checked his revolver, making sure all 6 chambers were loaded. "To see Randall McAllister." His voice was steady. "Time to face this head-on." "Not alone." She protested, struggling to rise. "Stay with the baby," he said gently. "Mr. Wilkins will look in on you both." He lifted the child one more time, pressing his face to her downy head. Her sweet milk scent centered him, strengthened his resolve. Sophia caught his hand as he turned to go. "Be careful. McAllister's pride is a dangerous thing." Jed nodded, squeezing her fingers carefully. Then he stepped out into the pearl-gray dawn. His one remaining horse stomped restlessly as he saddled her, sensing his mood. The baby was secure in a sling across his chest, warm against his heart. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it empty-handed. He had something worth fighting for, now something worth dying for, if need be. The sun broke over the hills as he swung into the saddle, painting the sky blood-dash red. It was time to end this. One way or another, the morning sun cast long shadows. As Jed guided his horse along the dusty trail toward the McAllister ranch, the baby dozed peacefully against his chest, secured in the cloth sling Sophia had shown him how to tie. Her tiny breaths, warm and steady, gave him strength even as doubt gnawed at his resolve. Granite Bluff stirred to life as he passed. Women paused in hanging laundry. Men stopped their work at the livery stable, and children froze mid-play. Whole town seemed to hold its breath. Pastor Wilkins stood on the church steps, hands clasped as if in prayer. Deputy Pike lounged against a hitching post, a knowing smirk on his face. The clop of hooves and creak of leather filled the heavy silence. Jed kept his eyes forward, though he felt every stare like a physical weight on his shoulders. The baby stirred, making small sounds of contentment that nearly broke his heart. She trusted him completely, this little one who had changed everything. The McAllister ranch spread vast before him, green pastures dotted with prime cattle. The morning light caught the whitewashed fence posts and the brass nameplate on the grand gate. 2 armed riders appeared from behind a stand of cottonwoods, rifles held ready. "That's far enough, Boone," the first rider called. Jed recognized him as Chuck Hawkins, McAllister's lead hand. "State your business." Jed reined his horse to a stop, dust settling around her hooves. "Come to see Mr. McAllister." His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. "About the child." The riders exchanged glances. After a tense moment, Hawkins nodded toward the house. "Follow us." "Any funny business, you won't make it 10 feet. The long drive to the main house felt like a funeral procession. More armed men emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, falling in behind them. Yet's horse sensed his unease, tossing her head and dancing sideways. The baby whimpered softly, and he gentled both with a quiet word. Randall McAllister Jr. waited on the broad porch, lounging in a cane-backed chair as if holding court. His fancy boots gleamed, and a silver watch chain caught the sun. Behind him stood his father, Randall Sr., face hard as granite. "Well, well," Junior drawled, rising. Slowly, the giant's come to his senses at last. His eyes fixed on the bundle against Jed's chest. "Brought my little problem back where it belongs." Yet's hands tightened on the reins. Every fiber of his being screamed to turn and ride, to protect this precious life he'd come to love. But the memory of flames, of Sophia's burns, of danger, threatening those he cared for, weighed him down. "Come to surrender her," he managed, each word tasting like ashes. "Can't fight your whole ranch, can't keep her safe." Junior's laugh was cruel. "Surrender. Like she was yours to begin with." He descended the steps, boots clicking on wood. "That thing is a mistake. A moment of weakness, best forgotten. Though I must say, you've saved me considerable trouble playing nursemaid these weeks." Jed lowered his gaze, shame and rage warring in his chest. The baby shifted in her sling, pressing one tiny hand against his heart. The touch was like a brand, reminding him of every moment since he'd found her in the snow, her first smile, her trusting grip on his finger, the peace in her eyes when he sang the lullabies Sophia had taught him. Then, in the heavy silence, he heard it again, clear as a bell, soft as a prayer. "Papa." The world stopped. Junior's sneering face, the armed men, the grand house all fell away. There was only this moment, this miracle, this child who had chosen him as surely as he had. Chosen her, something broke open in Jed's chest, flooding him with certainty. The fear that had driven him here burned away like morning mist. In its place blazed a fury bright as the sun, a love fierce as a prairie fire. "No man," he roared, voice rolling like thunder across the yard, "will ever call this child a mistake." His horse reared, catching his spirit. "She's a gift from God himself, and I'm her papa, sure as sunrise." Before anyone could react, Jed wheeled his horse hard. The baby clung to him, secure in her sling, as they thundered through the startled guards. Shouts erupted behind them. Hooves pounded the earth as riders gave chase. But Jed rode like a man possessed, like every angel in heaven watched over them. The baby's warmth against his chest was better than armor. A few shots cracked out, but even McAllister's hardened. Men hesitated to fire true at a man carrying a child. They raced past shocked ranch hands and scattered cattle. Jed's horse, sensing his determination, gave her all. The wind sang in his ears, carrying away Junior's furious cursing. The baby's delighted giggles mixed with the thunder of hoofs. The road to town stretched before them, dust rising like a signal fire. Jed knew with bone-deep certainty that this was right. His stand would be public, final, witnessed by God and neighbor alike. Let them all see what love could do. Let them watch a father defend his child. The chase stretched out behind him, But Jed didn't look back. His whole world had narrowed to the path ahead and the precious weight against his heart. He bent low over his horse's neck, whispering encouragement to both his charges. "Hold fast, little one," he murmured as they flew toward Granite Bluff. "Your papa's got you now. Ain't nothing gonna change that. Not ever." Church bells rang clear across Granite Bluff, calling the faithful to worship on this bright Sunday morning. The sanctuary of the little clapboard church brimmed with townsfolk dressed in their finest, hymn books open as Pastor Wilkins prepared to begin the service. Sophia Lonefeather sat near the front, her burned arm carefully bandaged, her face drawn with pain but resolute. The thunder of hooves grew louder outside. Then the double doors burst open, morning light flooding the aisle. Jed Boone filled the doorway. The baby clutched safely to his chest. His clothes were dust-covered, his face weathered by the hard ride, but his eyes blazed with purpose. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Women clutched their shawls closer. Men half rose from their seats. The baby, remarkably calm despite the commotion, gripped Jet's shirt with tiny fingers. "Forgive the interruption," Pastor Jet's deep voice carried to every corner. "But truth needs speaking, and God's house seems fitting." Pastor Wilkins nodded slowly, stepping aside from the pulpit. Jed strode forward, each boot step echoing on the wooden floors. He reached into his vest and withdrew a crumpled letter, smoothing it carefully on the pulpit surface. "This here's a letter," he announced, "from the McAllister Ranch." His fingers trembled slightly as he held it up. "Seems they got something to hide, something they'd kill to keep quiet." The congregation stirred uneasily. Deputy Harlan moved toward the door, but several farmers blocked his path with stern looks. Yet's voice grew stronger as he read. "The child in question belongs to the McAllister family. Any attempt to expose this matter will be met with severe consequences. Silence will be rewarded. Speech will bring ruin." He looked up, scanning the shocked faces. "They tried burning my barn, nearly killed Sophia here, all to hide their shame." Pastor Wilkins stepped forward, placing a steady hand on Yet's shoulder. "The Lord says, 'What is done in darkness will be brought to light,'" he quoted firmly. "This child is not ashamed to be hidden, but a gift of God's mercy." The doors slammed open again. Randall McAllister Sr. stormed in, face flushed with rage, his son skulking behind him. "How dare you?" he thundered. "This is slander." "Have you all but something remarkable happened then?" Mrs. Mathers, who had been first to whisper against the baby, rose from her pew. Without a word, she walked to stand beside Sophia. Then Widow Jensen followed. One by one, the women of the church left their seats, forming a circle around Sophia and the baby in Yet's arms. "We've watched this child grow strong," Mrs. Mathers declared, her voice quavering but clear. "Watched her bring light to dark places. Watched her heal hurts deeper than burns and bruises. Seen how she softened hard hearts," added another. "Woman made us remember what matters most. This child will be defended," Widow Jensen stated firmly. "By all of us." McAllister's face purpled. "You can't prove anything. That creature could be anyone's get. Could be the Indian woman's for all we know. She's mine." Yet's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood to his full height, cradling the baby gently. Not by blood, but by choice, by love, by God's own leading. He looked down at the child, who reached up to pat his cheek. Found her in the snow, near dead. Heard her call me Papa, clear as day. That's worth more than any fine breeding or fancy name. The baby chose that moment to gurgle happily, reaching toward Sophia. The sound seemed to break something in the air. Mrs. Peterson, the organist, touched a key, then another. The familiar notes of Amazing Grace filled the sanctuary. One voice joined in, then another. Soon the whole congregation sang, drowning out McAllister's blustering threats. The rancher backed toward the door, pulling his son with him. Their power broken by something stronger than fear or money. Jed looked down at Sophia, who smiled through tears. The women's circle remained unbroken, a wall of grace and determination. Pastor Wilkins raised his hands in blessing, and the morning light through the windows seemed to glow brighter, as if heaven itself approved. The baby reached out, touching the letter that had caused so much strife. Jed carefully tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. In that moment, as the hymn swelled around them, he knew that truth had found its voice at last. The town had chosen justice over fear, love over power, and a family made by choice over one bound by shame. Pastor Wilkins's voice rose above the music. Let it be known that before God and this congregation, this child has found her true father, not in wealth or blood, but in the heart that chose to love her. The congregation responded with a resounding amen, and even the spring breeze through the open doors seemed to whisper its approval. The baby looked around at all the faces, then laid her head trustingly on Yet's broad chest, at peace in her father's arms. The evening sun cast long shadows across Granite Bluff as Jed guided his wagon toward home. Sophia sat beside him, her burned arm carefully bandaged and resting in her lap. The baby slept peacefully in a basket between them, wrapped snugly in a quilt donated by Mrs. Mathers herself. The wheels creaked softly over the rutted path, each turn bringing them closer to the cabin that had become more than just shelter. "Looks like we got company waiting," Jed said quietly, nodding toward the cluster of wagons and townspeople gathered near his scorched barn. Sophia's eyes widened at the sight. "So many," she whispered. As they drew closer, they could see piles of fresh-cut lumber stacked neatly where the barn had stood. Men with tools moved purposefully, measuring and marking where new posts would rise. Women bustled around a makeshift outdoor kitchen, the smell of stew and fresh bread drifting on the evening air. Farmer Thompson stepped forward as Jed pulled the wagon to a stop. "Figured you might need a hand, Jed," he said, pushing his hat back. "Barn won't raise itself." "Much obliged," Jed replied, his voice rough with emotion. He helped Sophia down carefully, mindful of her injury. Mrs. Peterson hurried over with a covered dish. "Made my mother's chicken and dumplings," she announced. "That baby needs a well-fed mama and papa, proper-like." Sophia accepted the dish with her good arm, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "Your kindness means more than words can say." Inside the cabin, the air still held traces of smoke, but someone had swept and aired it out. Fresh flowers sat in a jar on the table, and new curtains hung at the windows, small touches that spoke of caring hands. Jed carried the baby's basket to the scorched cradle in the corner. The wooden bed had survived the fire, but bore dark marks along one side. He ran his rough hand over the damaged wood, remembering how close they'd come to losing everything. "Here," Sophia said, settling into the rocking chair someone had brought in. "Let me hold her while you work on that cradle." Jed carefully lifted the sleeping child and placed her in Sophia's arms. The sight stirred something deep in his chest, something that had been growing stronger with each passing day as he worked. Sanding away the scorched patches and replacing damaged pieces, the sounds of community filled the air outside. Hammer strikes echoed as men began setting posts. For the new barn, women's voices carried through the open window, sharing news and organizing meals for the days ahead. Inside, Sophia hummed softly to the baby, a gentle Comanche melody that seemed to make the cabin itself feel warmer. For the first time since that frigid morning when he'd found the child in the snow, laughter came easily to Yet's lips as he worked. "Never thought I'd see the day," he mused, fitting a new slat into place. The town that once whispered behind closed doors, now standing shoulder to shoulder in our yard." "Love changes hearts," Sophia replied, adjusting the baby's blanket. "Even the hardest ones." Jed paused in his work, looking at her intently. "Speaking of hard hearts," he said slowly, "reckon mine's learned a thing or two these past weeks." He set his tools aside, moving to kneel beside the rocking chair. "Watching you with her, seeing how you face the world with such grace. It's taught me more than all my years of fighting ever did." Sophia's hands stilled on the blanket. "Achoo." "Learned well, Jed Boone," she said softly. "I've watched tenderness grow in you day by day." The baby stirred between them, making those small, contented sounds that had become precious to them both. Her tiny hand reached up, catching a strand of Sophia's dark hair. Jed's heart hammered in his chest as he gathered his courage. "Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I ain't got much to offer except a scorched cabin and a whole lot of work ahead. But I reckon I'd be proud if you'd stay. Not just to help with the baby, but," he swallowed hard, "as my partner, my wife, if you'd have me." Sophia's breath caught. The rocking chair creaked to a stop as she met his gaze. Outside, the sounds of construction continued, but in the cabin, time seemed to pause. "Such a step," she said carefully, "would need to be taken properly before God and the town." Her dark eyes held both warmth and wisdom. "Are you certain that's what you want?" Jed nodded, his large hands gentle as they covered hers. "More certain than I've ever been about anything. Fear and hope are wrestling in my heart, something fierce, but I know this is right." A smile spread slowly across Sophia's face, like sunrise over the prairie. "Then, yes," she whispered. "Yes." The baby chose that moment to wake fully, letting out a happy gurgle that made them both laugh. Outside, the newly built fire pit glowed orange in the gathering dusk, smoke rising straight and true against the darkening sky. Through the window, they could see their neighbors working together, sharing stories and strength as they rebuilt what hatred had tried to destroy. The cabin, once as empty as Jed's life had been, now hummed with the quiet joy of new beginnings. Jed stood slowly, careful not to disturb the baby. He added wood to their own hearth, watching as the flames caught and grew stronger. Like the fire, he thought, like the love that had sparked between them all, small at first, then growing, warming, changing everything it touched. The weeks following their decision brought a quiet joy to the cabin. Each morning found Jed and Sophia moving in an easy rhythm around each other, tending to the baby and rebuilding what had been lost. The new barn rose steadily, its fresh timber gleaming in the spring sunlight. Inside, the cabin transformed with small touches that spoke of permanence and hope. Pastor Wilkins arrived one crisp morning, his Bible tucked under his arm. He paused at the threshold, smiling at the sight before him, Jed rocking the baby, while Sophia kneaded bread at the table. "The Lord's blessing rests here," he declared, stepping inside. "I can feel it in the very air." Jed shifted the sleeping child in his arms. "Reckon we could use an extra measure of blessing, Pastor." The preacher moved through the cabin, sprinkling holy water and offering prayers in each corner. When he reached the cradle, now restored and gleaming with fresh polish, he lingered longest. "Every child deserves a home filled with love," he said softly. "You two have given her that, against all odds." Throughout that week, wagons appeared regularly at their gate. Mrs. Thompson brought a patchwork quilt she had saved for her own daughter's wedding. "Seems right it should go to a family built on love rather than obligation," she said, pressing it into Sophia's hands. The Baker sisters arrived with loaves of fresh bread and jars of preserves. Even crusty old Widow Mathers, who had once whispered the harshest judgments, led a spotted milk cow up their path one evening. "Can't have a baby without proper milk?" she muttered, not meeting their eyes. But her weathered hands trembled as she demonstrated how to milk the gentle creature. And her voice softened when the baby reached for her finger. The rain began falling 7 days later, a steady spring shower that turned the world soft and gray. Inside the cabin, candles flickered as Pastor Wilkins prepared for the ceremony. Only 2 witnesses stood with them, Farmer Thompson and his wife, who had been first to offer help after the fire. Sophia wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers the children had gathered before the rain began. The baby fussed in her cradle until Sophia lifted her, tucking her close in a soft blanket. Jed stood tall beside the hearth, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean shirt and his best vest. His hands, rough from rebuilding the barn, fidgeted with his collar until Pastor Wilkins cleared his throat gently. "We gather here," the preacher began, "in this humble home, to witness a union blessed by God Himself. For it is written that love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Thunder rumbled outside, but within the cabin, peace reigned. The baby quieted in Sophia's arms, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "Jedediah Boone," Pastor Wilkins continued, "do you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, and protect her in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Jed's voice trembled as he answered, "I do." Then, unprompted, he added, "And I vow before God and these witnesses to raise this child in faith and honor, to be the father she deserves all the days of my life." Tears gleamed in Sophia's eyes. As the pastor turned to her, "Sophia Lonefeather, do you take this man to be your lawful wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, honor him, and keep him in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," she whispered, her voice steady despite her tears. They exchanged simple rings, plain bands that Jed had traded his best saddle to obtain. As they slipped them onto each other's fingers, the baby cooed softly, as if adding her own blessing to the moment. Pastor Wilkins placed one hand on Yet's shoulder and the other on the child's head. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. And this child, brought to you by His providence, may she grow in grace and wisdom within the circle of your love." Mrs. Thompson wiped her eyes with her handkerchief as her husband nodded approvingly. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, but inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting a golden glow over the scene after the witnesses departed and Pastor Wilkins had blessed them one final time. Jed and Sophia found themselves alone with their daughter. The storm outside had deepened, making the cabin feel like a sanctuary of light and warmth. Jed settled into his chair by the fire, holding his arms out for the baby. Sophia passed her to him carefully, then sat beside them, her head resting against his shoulder. The child's eyes were heavy with sleep, but her tiny hand reached up to pat Yet's chest in that trusting way that never failed to humble him. For the first time since finding her in the snow, Jed felt complete peace settle over him. The emptiness that had haunted him since his first wife's death years ago seemed to fade like morning mist. Here, in this moment, he was whole again, not replacing what was lost, but building something new and precious. The rain sang against the windows, and the fire popped softly in the hearth. Sophia's breath fell into an easy rhythm beside him, her hand entwined with his, their rings catching the firelight. The baby slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that she was home. It's truly home at last, weeks after the wedding. Dark clouds gathered once more over Granite Bluff. McAllister's foreman marched into the sheriff's office, brandishing accusations that Jed had stolen cattle from their northern pastures. The charges struck like lightning through the town, and soon a hearing was called before Judge Harrison. Yet's stomach knotted as he entered the courthouse. The thought of losing everything, his family, his freedom, his honor, weighed heavy. on his shoulders, but Sophia walked tall beside him, their baby nestled in her arms, meeting every suspicious glare with quiet dignity. One by one, townspeople rose to speak. Mrs. Thompson testified about Jed's honest dealings at the mercantile. Farmer Wilson recalled how Jed had helped rebuild his fence without asking payment. Even Deputy Harlan, who had once sneered at Jed, admitted he had never known the big man to steal so much as a nail. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "These charges are dismissed," he declared, fixing McAllister with a stern eye. "Let there be no more harassment of this family." Outside, beneath the spring sky, Sophia squeezed Jed's hand. "Truth and faith prevailed," she whispered. That evening, riding home together, their baby sleeping peacefully between them in the saddle, Jed marveled at how a tiny abandoned child had brought out such courage in their neighbors. His heart swelled with gratitude for second chances and the blessing of true community. Months stretched into summer, bringing new life to Granite Bluff. The rebuilt barn stood proud against the blue sky, a testament to neighborly bonds. Folk had come together, mending fences and planting hay alongside Jed, their hammers ringing out like bells of friendship in the yard. Sophia knelt among her growing herbs and vegetables, her garden a patch of green promise. Near her, a wooden cradle held their growing daughter, now plump-cheeked and full of sunshine. Her happy sounds mixed with birdsong in the warm air as the sun painted the hills crimson that evening. Townsfolk gathered in Jed's yard. He lifted his daughter high, her tiny form silhouetted against the sunset. "This here's my daughter," he declared, voice thick with pride. The crowd broke into amazing grace, their voices carrying across the peaceful valley. Sophia pressed close to his side, her dark eyes shining. "God mends broken hearts," she whispered. "He made us whole." Jed blinked back tears as the baby reached for his beard, her fingers tangling in the familiar bristles. Then came the word, clear as a bell, "Papa." The gathered friends fell silent, then burst into joyful murmurs. Lamplight spilled from the cabin windows, warming the scene of a family made complete, the giant who had found his heart, the healer who had found her home, and the child who had brought redemption to them all. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. Something resonated? Subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.